Hi, my name is Shahal Gindi. I'm a psychologist from Israel. I'm going to be talking today about autism. Autism is on the rise. So, if in the 80s we were talking about a disorder that is quite rare, 1 in 2,000, then in the 1990s, when more scientific research into the epidemiology started to happen, there were talks about 1 in 10, 4 to 16 in 10,000, and so on. And over the years, it has increased. The prevalence has increased. And lately, in December 2015, we've had one survey talk about 1 in 45. I think still most clinicians would say that it's more around 1 in 100, but still it's a very a large percent and a large increase from what we saw 20, 30 years ago. So I'm going to be talking today about what autism is, and I'm going to be using two things. I'm going to be using a DSM-5. DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, is the psychiatric manual for diagnosing disorders. And I'm going to be using a movie I really like called Autism the Musical. I'm going to be showing clips that will explain the different manifestations of autism. But first, let's talk a bit about the history. The term autism was actually coined by Eugen Bleuler, a Swiss psychiatrist, who used it in the context of schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is a very severe mental illness and has to do with a detachment from reality. And what he noticed about people with schizophrenia is that sometimes they retreat into the self, and he called that autism. And then, in a very extraordinary coincidence in history, two independent clinicians published papers about this phenomena of autism in children, not in schizophrenia, but in young children. The first was Leo Kanner in Baltimore, and he published in 1943 an essay called Autistic Disturbances of Affective Contact, where he showed 11 children with extreme aloneness, kids that had a lot of difficulty relating to others. He spoke about their need for sameness. They wanted things to be the same all the time, and when it didn't happen the same way, they were very agitated. And to this day, the term Kanner syndrome is still used sometimes to depict kids who are on the severe end of the spectrum. In 1944, so really at the same time, Hans Asperger in Germany, Leo Kanner was in the United States, Hans Asperger published Autistic Psychopathy in Childhood, where he showed 4 cases of little professors. And he spoke about these kids having difficulty understanding the point of view of another. So they didn't understand why people thought differently than them and why people had different feelings than them. And that's what he called lack of empathy. They had a lot of difficulty forming friendships, and their conversations were pretty unilateral. They were talking about things that interested them, and that was it. And so a lot of them had a particular area of interest, and they just spoke about that regardless of what their conversant wanted to talk about. So, for example, trains and cars and things like that. Then that's what interested them, and they were talking about that. They were, in his words, obsessive about it. He also noticed that in their motor development, they were quite clumsy. So these two were the pioneers. And then in the 90s, it really got into DSM. And in DSM, it was all under an umbrella term called Pervasive Developmental Disorder, PDD for short. And they had 5 categories underneath this umbrella term of PDD. And 2 of them are really relevant. That's autistic disorder and Asperger's disorder. And the rest of them are not that important clinically. Rett syndrome is shown to be biological, so it's no longer a psychiatric disorder. And PDD-NOS was really part of the problem, that a lot of clinicians just went for that diagnosis instead of really choosing between autistic disorder and Asperger's. And part of the problem was that it wasn't defined very well. The difference between them was all about language development. And a lot of the symptoms were very similar. And people were saying, this is not very useful. We can see there's a spectrum. We can see that there are people who are high functioning and low functioning with autism. And we know what autism is. We know that it's essentially a problem with social communication. And then just the manifestations are different. So what happened is that in DSM-5 that was published in March 2013, they just scratched all these titles and left only one label, and that was autism spectrum disorder, ASD for short. So all these labels are no longer relevant for DSM diagnosis, only ASD. So I'm going to be talking about DSM-5 and how it presents the different symptoms and how a clinician is supposed to diagnose ASD. And I'm going to be using, as advertised, this movie, Autism the Musical. So let me show you the preview to this movie. And this way you also get to know the kids that I'm going to be showing you today. Lexi, Wyatt, Henry, Adam, and Neil. Let's see them. So this movie is all about how this woman, Elaine Hall, a wonderful woman who had an idea for a project that's quite unique, making a musical with autistic children, with children on the autism spectrum. And so her son Neil is in the project. You can see him over here. She's hugging him, and you can see him here. And the rest of the kids are also in the play, and you'll see parts of the play as I show the clips. And DSM-5 has two clusters, Cluster A and Cluster B. Cluster A has to do with persistent difficulties in the social use of verbal and nonverbal communication. And there are three symptoms. And in order to be given a diagnosis of ASD, you need to have all three. So we're talking about three symptoms that all have to do with communication. What is communication? Communication is about give and take. So someone tells you something and you respond. And of course, it's very social. So these two terms that were once different clusters in DSM-4, are now together as social communication, basically. So let's see each one of the symptoms and see clips from the movie that will exemplify them. So the first one, A1, is deficits in social emotional reciprocity. And we're going to be seeing Neil and to see how these deficits can manifest themselves. And of course, they can manifest themselves in many different ways. Basically, social reciprocity has to do with the fact that you know the give and take of social situations. For example, if someone comes up to me and says, "How was your weekend?" I tell him about my weekend, but then I also ask him, "How was your weekend?" And if he says it was horrible, and then I express some empathy, and that's emotional reciprocity. I don't say, "Oh, yours was horrible, mine was great," and laughs at it in his face, right? So that's emotional reciprocity. Let's see Neil in a play situation.
We're just having a special time. We get to play with you without all the noise around. What we're pretending about is where you are. It's time to go to school. Should we take the bus or should we drive?
Bus.
Oop, there's a red light. What do we do? Green light. Where did we pretend we went today?
School.
Yeah. And what did we ride on? A bus. A bus. And did you make new friends?
Yes.
Can you shake hands with your friend? Shake hands? That was really nice. You guys, can you look at each other and shake hands? Will, can you guys look at each other and shake hands? And thank your scene partner. That was a great scene. Thank you. Thank you, my scene partner. Wait, come here. You must be so proud of yourself. You know, you pretend played so nicely. I'm so proud of you. You proud of yourself? Well, give me 5 for proud.
So as you could see, Neil is quite has quite a lot of difficulties in communication. First of all, he doesn't really speak. Sometimes people call it nonverbal, for lack of a better word. And so he has a lot of difficulty expressing himself. He only made one syllable here instead of saying bus, he said buck. And he understands a bit. So when his mother asks him to shake his partner's hand, he extends his hand, and that's nice. But he has a lot of difficulties in communication. He has a lot of difficulties in social communication. For example, eye contact. He really has a hard time maintaining that. You could also see at the beginning, I'll show you that again, that he is using something called self-stimulation. Look at it, the way that he plays with his fingers here. That's called, sorry, self-stimulation. And we'll talk about it later. But basically, what I wanted to show here is the lack of emotional reciprocity. In this specific clip, it was in the context of play. Now let's go on to the next symptom. I'm reminding you that we're talking about the A cluster in DSM-5, where there are 3 symptoms and all have to be present for a diagnosis to be given. So A2 has to do with deficits in nonverbal communicative behaviors used for social interaction. We already saw that with Neil as well. Now we're going to see it with Henry. Henry is very different than Neil. He has very high language, but still he has a very hard time with eye contact.
Oh, I know. I got an idea.
Wait one second.
One of my friends. Quetzalcoatlus. We're gonna need a manosaur of our own.
Henry, I'm going to ask you something. When you tell me a story, I really love listening to it, but can you look me in the eyes so I can see your beautiful eyes and I can hear the story? So try it again.
See,
Almost. So my eyes. Wait. Oh my gosh, look at you. Wait. Oh my gosh. I love looking at you.
Sharks.
Try it again. Say sharks. Look at me.
Sharks attack seals because surfers sharks attack surfers because they're on their surfboard. They're shaped like seals.
God, you looked right at me. Let's see. Wait, the surfboards are shaped like seals? Try
Wait,
again.
on them when they're on them, it looks like a seal. So that's why they attack.
You know, I like learning from you. Do you know how smart you are? Extremely smart. I loved when you smiled when I said how much how compassionate you are. And you look right at me. So I want you to look now the same way you looked at me. Look in your friend's eyes right now. Look at him looking at you. Yeah, what do you think about Henry? What do you think about Henry?
Well, I think he's very smart. He's very smart about reptiles, and I'm interested in animals too, and I really like that.
So tell him, look in his eyes and tell him you are very smart. Say right?
You are very smart.
Okay.
Thanks. I've always wanted to hear that.
So I think that was a very lovely moment, but in addition, you could really see Henry's difficulties with social difficulties maintaining eye contact with Eileen, who will also be called Coach E during the movie and in certain of the clips that I'll show today. And he has difficulties with other aspects of the social interaction, but we won't delve into that too deeply now. Let's talk about the third symptom in cluster A, and that's deficit in developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. And for this, we're going to see Adam. Adam is in a regular classroom, but he has an aide, Beatrice, who helps him mediate social situations for him and so on. So let's see Adam.
Okay, we have the time. Okay. I'm holding it. Here, Raleigh, hold this. Come on, just hold it.
Sorry.
He's obsessed with Calandra. Can you guess why? The long, pretty blonde hair. He's been asking to marry her. Oh, time's up. You can let Calandra go now. Time's up. He has a girl obsession. He just loves ladies. And you know, he's got that charisma thing going where they love him. It really breaks my heart when I kind of realize, wow, if he wasn't autistic, imagine the possibilities.
Okay. So what we saw here, Adam is within a regular classroom, but he doesn't have any friends in the sense that it's an equal relationship where they both like each other and so they spend time together, they meet after school. And also, Adam has very little facial expression, so a lot of the time his expression is pretty flat. And because of these difficulties, Beatrice helps him. He has an aide at school, and you can see that Beatrice mediates the social situation for him. He has a specific time that he can spend with Calandra, and she uses a timer to budget his time in a sense. And at the end of the clip, you could also see something that doesn't have to do with symptom A3. It has to do with one of the B symptoms, and that was the sensory difficulty. Him standing in the yard at recess and holding his hands to his ears because he's overwhelmed with auditory stimuli, and that basically is a sensory issue. But it also has to do with social communication in the sense that it's not very good judgment to stand at recess and put your hands to your ears because you look funny to the other kids. So these were the cluster A symptoms that have to do with social communication, and the cluster B symptoms have to do with restricted repetitive behaviors. And we're going to see two clips that have to do with B1, stereotype or repetitive motor movements or speech. And the first one shows Lexi when she's 14 years old, and it demonstrates repetitive speech called echolalia. Let's watch the clip.
Hi, Lexi.
Oh, that's your Coach E imitation.
Hi, Coachy. It's so good to see you. Hi, sweetie pie.
Lexi's echolalia. She can repeat back what's said to her, but she has a hard time generating original speech.
How do you feel about Coach E?
How do I feel about Coachy?
Yeah, can you type how you feel about Coach E?
Okay. I can type how do I feel about Coachy.
Okay. Oh, she's typing how do I feel about Coach E.
Phil. What's so funny, Ma? No.
Do you know what autism is?
Autism?
Do you know?
Yeah.
What is it?
Autism means that...
You can type it.
Oh, okay, Mom. Autism means that something will be damaged.
What's damaging?
Damaging.
What does it mean?
It means damaging means that people who could damage, they're destroying actions of ways that together it means I love you.
I love you too.
Sure. Let's see.
And it's saved.
Saved.
Okay, this is obviously a very touching scene, but I want to emphasize the fact that Lexi does not use language the way most people do. And you could see that, for example, when she says quite a lot of words that have a negative context, but she doesn't use them in a sentence in a way that's coherent. But it's obvious to us that she thinks there's something negative about autism. And of course, the most notable thing is her use of echolalia. So when she's asked a question or is said something, then she basically repeats what is said to her. Sometimes she changes the intonation, and that's useful for communication. It's functional, but still, it's not a regular way of speaking. And so Lexi has echolalia, and it's immediate echolalia. So she repeats exactly what is said to her immediately. There's also delayed echolalia, where people just repeat phrases that they've heard a while back. So, for example, if a kid really likes SpongeBob, then he can repeat sentences from SpongeBob when he's talking to his friends or to his teachers and to his peers in classroom. And that could function in a communication and could be not very functional. But anyway, it is bizarre a lot of the times. So that's delayed echolalia. So that's B1, and we're going to see another example of B1, and also from Lexi. And this one is not repetitive speech, but repetitive motor movements. So let's see Lexi when she is 2 years old and repeating movements this time. Oops, sorry about that. Let's go back.
When I would take her to the playground or even in our little mommy and me's, she would literally shut down. Sweetheart? Brady. Lex? Getting it documented. You see, you show this to some social worker and they'll have her committed. That's what autistic children do. Lex. Lexington. Lex. Shorty. Oh, man.
So you could see that she is behaving in a very irregular way. And basically, the restricted repetitive behaviors, what we see in them, is these are methods that people with autism use to remain in their comfort zone and not to be attacked by the outside world. So a lot of people with autism would do these repetitive movements, for example, rocking, tiptoeing, or flapping their hands, and they're within their comfort zone, and this way they sometimes protect themselves from overwhelming sensory stimuli, or just retreat into their own world in a way that they can't be surprised by the outside world, which is a lot of what people with autism have difficulty with, the fact that the outside world is unpredictable while their inside world is much more predictable. So let's continue with cluster B. I'm reminding you that in order to be given a diagnosis of ASD, you need to have all the symptoms from cluster A and only 2 out of 4 in cluster B. So this was the first one. The next one is insistence on sameness. This is something that Leo Kanner already noticed in 1943, the fact that people with autism want things to be the same. I said it before as well, that they don't like to be surprised. They want the world to be predicted. And this was also exemplified very nicely in the movie Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman. And what I'm going to show now, I'm going to show Adam. And Adam is in a rehearsal for the musical. And he is supposed to play the cello, but then they tell him that instead of playing the cello, he is going to sing the song and not play the cello. And let's see how he reacts to this change.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are.
Perfect. We're just gonna have him sing. It's beautiful.
No,
Today, we can't today. I'm not gonna talk to you about it right now, Roseanne. We gotta think of everybody.
I
He did
know,
beautiful.
but
Okay?
he didn't get to do it.
Hi, Victor. Hi, Ryan. Why are you playing for Dad? He got telling me. Here, Ryan. Look here. Don't touch me. Rubbers. Relax. Rubbers.
You want to show the audience?
Yes.
Okay, go in the audience.
Let go! Let go! Let go! Let go! Let go!
We're gonna go home. We're gonna go.
I don't want to go home! Let go! I want to go home!
I'm sorry. I know it's been a trying day. I got to get back out there.
I know,
but
I understand,
I
but
do know.
this would not have happened.
Where is he?
I don't know.
Adam? No one hears when she cries. No one sees
This is a nightmare. He went up there. He went into the theater.
Is Adam still here? Adam? Adam, we're gonna sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, sweetie.
I don't want to do Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star.
Okay.
Go up and try it. You want to go try it? It's your turn to do
Nah.
Twinkle Twinkle. On
Nah,
the
I'm going to
stage?
do Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star.
Want me to pick you up?
No,
and
no,
you
no,
sing
no,
it?
no. No, 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 no.
Go, go.
No!
Come on, let me hear you.
Okay, ready? Right here. Adam, right here, sweetie pie.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Everybody. What you are. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. How I wonder what you are.
Well, all's well that ends well, but this wasn't easy for his mom or anyone else over there. And it wasn't easy for him because he really wanted things to be as he saw them happening in his mind, and then they weren't. And you saw him go into a tantrum, and that happens quite a lot when things do not happen the way people with autism expect, and they get into a lot of emotional distress. So that's B2, and B3 is the highly restricted fixated interests. And a lot of people with autism have a particular area of interest, and they talk about it constantly, and that's all they want to know about, and explore it all the time. We're going to see Henry this time, and he has a passion for dinosaurs.
We'll first start off. We're over there. It's where the Colombian man.
Stay with Mom, Henry. Stay with Mom. Hey, back here, bub.
If you were a time traveler,
autistic beasts. You stay away. They are very sophisticated hunters, just like lions.
Henry started to show an interest in dinosaurs and prehistoric creatures when he was about, I'm going to say about 2.5, 3 years old.
Now you can see that this saber-tooth is actually hunting down its meal. Look at the way they use the teeth.
Henry has Asperger's syndrome, which is what some people call high-functioning autism. Kids with Asperger's tend to be very gifted or very intelligent in specific areas. With my son, it's all about reptiles and dinosaurs.
You can see that the Columbian mammoth was the biggest of all. Told you so.
They sort of appear to be like a typically developing child, but they're not. There's a lot going on that people don't see.
Look at this jungle. Look. Harlan Sloth.
To soothe his own anxiety, he's been talking to himself and really withdrawing into his own world and not socializing with the other kids at all.
Wait a minute, look out.
They kind of laugh at him, and apparently he's also being teased more. So he's starting to feel like an outcast, I think.
And they are eaten by the amphibious ambulocetus. It is a mammal. That is a bizarre beast. That is a bizarre beast.
Henry, if you could be one of these animals, which one would you be?
Ambulocetus.
Let me see.
Okay, so you could really see his passion for dinosaurs, and usually people with autism will go for these kind of topics, for example, dinosaurs, astronomy, trains, cars, usually more mechanical things, but not always, and it can be very, very different things. And I've had one kid whose interest was DSM diagnoses. Very peculiar, but it happens. And we're going to see another one here today. So B4, the last symptom in cluster B, has to do with the sensory impact. So people with autism have a unique profile usually, where they're sometimes hypersensitive, for example, hypersensitive to sound, and sometimes hyposensitive, so not very sensitive to, for example, touch. So a lot of people with autism would really need someone to hug them very strongly so that they really feel something. That's the way they want it. And they need deep touch. They don't need just a superficial touch. And it can also have to do with the visual stimuli, so that people with autism will be overwhelmed when there's a lot of visual noise around them. So a classroom for people with autism would ideally be not very crowded, not having a lot of things on the walls. And if anyone has been to such a classroom, I'm sure you saw that. So let's see a short example of B4.
These balloons are too loud.
You guys,
I'm
the
sorry.
balloons are too loud for people, guys. Balloons are too loud.
So this was a very short and simple example of auditory hypersensitivity, hyperactivity, and you could also see putting his hands to his ears in the recess. And now I'm gonna I've only shown you Wyatt for a very little bit. I want to show you Wyatt a bit more, and he can be very confusing. And so let's talk about his interesting monologues and dialogues.
So what's going on?
What?
School.
School? Nothing really.
Well, are you happy with your classroom?
I've already told you.
What's wrong with school? Or what's right?
100% of kids are retarded. Okay? That's my final reason.
100% in your class?
Yes.
So
That's, Mom, it's a special ed class.
where do you want to be? You want to be with the mainstream kids? In the regular 5th grade?
I've already told you this. I don't want to tell you.
Well,
What do you think a bully would say to me?
Ew, what's the matter with you? Ew, you're ugly. What would a bully say?
Have you ever heard a bully, Mom?
Yeah.
Have you ever heard a girl that's a bully?
A girl bully?
Yeah.
I guess so. Maybe not. What does a girl bully say?
Or
a boy bully?
Have you ever heard of any bully?
Are you bullied in school?
Yes.
And what do they say?
Keith. Remember Keith?
What did he do? They made faces at you.
Yeah, faces.
Did they call you names?
Yeah, they're gonna be doing that now.
What do they call you names?
Sixth grade. No, in sixth grade. I'm talking about previously.
Yeah.
It's gonna happen. They're gonna call me names.
What kind of names?
Because they're growing up, and when bullies grow up, they get meaner. Maybe if I go into a regular class and I show the bullies that how I can deal with a regular class, they're not gonna bully me. Maybe.
Yeah.
Do you think that's why? Do you think it's because I'm in a special ed class? Do you think that's why they start bullying me?
They'll probably poke fun at that. I know them to be kind of mean that way. Kids are kind of cruel sometimes.
Well, they'll still be cruel in a mainstream class. I know that.
Yeah.
I know they will.
So Wyatt raises a very interesting issue of where he should be placed, whether the special ed classroom is the best place or to be in inclusion like we saw Adam before. But the question it really raises for a lot of people watching this movie is whether he's autistic. I mean, he has so much insight. Is it possible that this is a wrong diagnosis? Let's see another monologue by Wyatt this time and see if we can figure something out.
I like the Miracle Project because it's fun, and the kids are sometimes nice. Sometimes they're in their own world, which is what I'm going to go with what I don't like. Sometimes I don't like it when kids go into their own world. You know, I do that a lot, but it just makes sense. Sometimes when you do that, I realize it now. You are in your own world. It's like Henry. Take Henry as an example. He's in his own world. What are you gonna do? You have your own world. How are you gonna make friends in your own world? Your own world. You see, this is what I don't like. Sometimes I don't get about kids. Why do they go into their? Why do I even go in my own world? And it's like you're not talking to anybody. There's no point of it. If I'm trying to be friends with Henry, he would go into his lizards and dinosaurs and. But there are good things about Henry too. And there's sad things.
Do you know when you go into your own world why you go there?
Sometimes I have no one to talk to. Like let's say I'm outside by myself. I have no one to talk to. So I just have to go in my own world. I just love having someone with me. And sometimes that doesn't always happen. You can have play dates, you can have sleepovers, but that's different. I'm talking about a friend. Sometimes I like being with somebody because it sometimes, yeah, it makes me feel happy inside when I'm with a friend. That can be kind. That cannot be mean. That is not mean. That is not rude. Not like a bully. Just a friend.
So you could see here in this clip that Wyatt is very insightful, and he sees the fact that people with autism go into their own world, and this raises many questions. For example, people look at this clip and they say, how can he be autistic? He really wants to have friends. He says, I love having someone with me. Doesn't that immediately exclude autism? So no, it doesn't. It's very important to point out that people with autism, for the most part, want to have friends. They want to have people. And now many things happen. First of all, the core difficulty is social skills. And when you don't have that, it's very difficult to have friends. Secondly, sometimes they get overwhelmed very quickly. by the peers, by people coming to them, by the sensory input. And so they want out. They want to go back into what Wyatt says here, into their own world. They need a timeout from people, but that doesn't mean that they don't want to have people. And then sometimes, it gets really sort of ironic that kids really want one of their friends to come over to their house, and when this friend finally comes, after half an hour, they can't bear it anymore, and they just want him out of the house. So it's very important to know that a lot of people with autism really want to have friends. And many people in general get hurt by relationships and don't want relationships because they're afraid to be hurt. And that happens to people with autism as it does to people in general. So that's one point that I find it very important to make. The other thing is the fact that he is insightful. And then again, that is not something that would exclude autism. So people with autism can be insightful, and having insights doesn't mean that you have social skills or charisma. And finally, the last point I want to make about this clip is what happens with Wyatt here when he starts to talk about bullies. So obviously this whole monologue of his about people going into their own world made him quite distressed. It's very difficult to think about these things. And what happened was that he drifted to his restricted area of interest, and that is bullies. That's what I said before, that sometimes these areas of restricted interest can be very peculiar. And that's what it is for him. And you saw that already, that he speaks about bullies with his mother. And there are other examples in the movie. And so here, what we can see is that this helps him relax, calm him down when he's agitated by talking about people going into their own world. So that's it for DSM-5. I just want to make one final point and exemplify it with a clip from Autism the Musical, and that is that in autism there are a lot of discrepancies in development, and one of the famous manifestations of these discrepancies is savant, what's called savant people who have extraordinary skills, splinter skills. For example, in Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman, he is very good at math while he can't, go to the grocery store and buy a can of Coke. So we're going to see Lexi here, who is very gifted. I don't know if she's savant, if she would qualify, but she's very gifted in music, while on the other hand, she draws like a 6-year-old and has many other areas in her development where she's lagging. So let's see that.
Hands touch, eyes meet, sudden silence, sudden heat, hands sleep in a deadly world. He could be that boy, but I'm not that girl. Don't dream.
I haven't really spoken to her about boys yet. And the idea that now she's starting to maybe notice the other kids more and start having feelings about them, and it's new for me. Do you want to brush it yourself a little?
So I do want to brush it myself a little.
She's 14. It's hard to know how much of who she is, typical in that respect.
Gold hair with a gentle curl. There's a girl I know. He loves her so. I'm not that girl.
I hope you enjoyed that song. I think she sings beautifully. I hope you enjoyed the lecture, and I wish you well. Bye-bye.